Thanks for joining me, Johnny. How are you going?
I'm doing well. It's good. Sorry if I'm all excited for everybody. I'm not usually up this early in the morning.
Well,
It's
thanks
not
for...
actually that early in the morning. Sorry. Go on.
Yeah, it should be getting on to midday there.
I'm not really that early in this midday, No, but yeah.
Well, you're here today to talk to us about Klaus Schwab in a little bit more detail. So most of the Open Voice audience already know about the Nazi connection with Klaus's father, but you've gone a little bit further in that background, and you're here to talk about that today.
Really understanding where Schwab went was understanding where his father pushed him towards and where that journey in his family history went, because Eugene Schwab would tell Klaus in like 1964, when Klaus was already earning degree after degree, honor after honor from different universities. I mean, this is a guy with like something like 14 degrees and honors over a matter of like
I think
4
it's like
years
17.
or something.
It's insane.
It's crazy. It's crazy. They were just handy. He was turning up at a place for 6 months, probably not even attending that often, and they would give him a degree from it. And so this idea of Schwab was just wandering around picking up qualifications. Well, you've got to accept that Klaus Schwab, to get to the position he's in, must be quite intelligent. He's not very personable, maybe empathetic. He's not very good with socializing with the common man or the peasant class, as his mentors would say, or the underclass, as his friends would say.
The underclass.
They're not very, he may not be very good at that, but he's a very intelligent man. And that intelligence was obviously noted. And Eugene Schwab himself would say, if you want to make something in this life, if you want to do something with your life, then you've got to go to Harvard. And Harvard at the time was the center of the research into thermonuclear war and the deterrence of thermonuclear attack, and was the center of power for the Americans, who were really leading Europe into this new future that was risked by the Soviet threat and, of course, the Cold War. So it was a very important place, and Eugene Schwab said, you've got to go there. Now, Klaus Schwab would say himself in interviews that he didn't attend a course. He actually attended seminars, and the seminar in question that he would attend is an extremely interesting seminar. It was set up in about 1951 by a guy called William Yandell Elliott, one of the most powerful men in US history that you have never heard of. Advisor to 6 presidents, close advisor to 6 presidents, a man who was really high up in the Council on Foreign Relations, a group which was, of course, like kind of like an arm of an ancient order, in a sense. I say ancient order, the Rhodesian idea of having an Anglo-American empire. Was put into action in the 20s, and then they created groups like Chatham House, and then straight after CFR, and this Council on Foreign Relations was an American-based project to try and get the world, get the Anglo-American world to align so that they could then take Europe as and make it into a massive super state, politically and socially. I mean, it seems like nuts for us to say that, but basically lots of people in history have all come up with the same conclusion. The only way to get world peace, in their ideas, in their world, is to combine 2 of the main superpowers together, leaving the other main bloc unable to cope with the threat, and of course overwhelm. And then to achieve that, you've got to have some sort of coherence between the super states you're building, and with the idea that wanting to combine an Anglo-American super state with Europe, Europe had historically lots of issues with war. And we'll come on to this in a bit, but a lot of people believe that was due to the fact they all spoke different languages, that they all had different cultures, and so that they would have wars all the time, instead of actually looking at the real reasons why most of these wars started, which was outside political interference. This was seen as, if you could give everybody one language, one culture, one common set of shared values across an entire superstate of Anglo-American Europe combined, then you would get world peace, is what, you know, a lot of these people fought. So in 1951, William Yandell Elliott, part of these roundtable groups, part of the CFR, would start up this course called the International Seminar. And what it was meant to be at the start, I do not know, but around that time, William Yandell Elliott would also recruit Henry Kissinger into the CFR by way of him leaving Harvard. Kissinger, the year before, applied to be an FBI spy, and McGeorge Bundy said, "No, you should go work for the CFR." And so William Yandell Elliott took him under his wing, and Kissinger would spend the next year through the 50s working on working groups about thermonuclear deterrence and foreign policy, and how the two combine at the CFR.
And just to clarify for those listening, so I think it was 1943 that Henry Kissinger joined the US Army.
Yeah.
And then
so
he was recruited from there by that guy, or was it Kramer?
Fritz Kramer fought alongside him
intelligence side of things.
Yeah. I mean, Kissinger was obviously a clever boy. And when you get put into pressure positions in things like armies and high pressure positions, people know this from employment in the real world, you know, high pressure industries and stuff, you really see the true nature of somebody, and you see their abilities, and you see how they react under stress and pressure. And I think Kissinger was always someone who just did the job really well, functional. And so Fritz Kramer, a guy who wore a monocle and spoke like this, like, you know, crazy, used to fight against used to have running battles against the Nazis and the communists, apparently, back in the day when he lived in Germany. He was a stereotype of a crazy German, and took Kissinger under his wing, saying something like to him like not thinking or caring is the best way to to manage situations. You know, there was a lot that Fritz Kramer obviously gave to him, and Fritz Kramer would go on to be advisor to multiple presidents too. And the thing is Henry Kissinger would say there's multiple people throughout his life who have lifted him up. And during that time, you'd say Fritz Kramer in the army, and going on to Harvard, then it would be McGeorge Bundy, another member of the CFR and a head of one of the schools. I think he was the head of School of Government at the time in Harvard, nominated him for the CFR, where William Yandell Elliott would then be his mentor and would be one of the biggest influences on his life and on the life of many people. Honestly, William Yandell Elliott is someone I will be looking into in the future. Extremely interesting fella, extremely dystopian fella. And he would set up this course, 1951, International Seminar. And by the 60s, Henry Kissinger, who was then head of the School of Government in Harvard, eventually, after working for the CFR for years and working for all of these different mapping out nuclear deterrence and becoming an advisor, of course, to the government, he had put himself in a place to understand nuclear deterrence and foreign policy at a time where everybody needed to know nuclear deterrence and foreign policy. He had situated himself in the right place, with help, of course, from others. And they would start this international seminar with Kissinger as executive director in about 1961, and it would be revealed, and Klaus Schwab would of course go to this international seminar in 1965 along with Pierre Trudeau and a couple other future world leaders, including a prime minister of Japan and a prime minister of Israel, amongst others I haven't worked out a full list of who attended the international seminar, and it did run from 1961 all the way to 1967. I think it ran a little bit beyond there, but petered off because it had been found out. Because in 1967, Humphrey Dorman, who worked for Harvard, had to publish a study, an investigation that showed that the international seminar, headed by Henry Kissinger and put into place by William Yandell Elliott, was funded through a known conduit by the CIA with $146,000 going just for the period from 1961 to 1966. And this was a CIA funded course. And when you actually go and look at what they were doing and look at the detail of what other people were writing at the time and what they were organizing, it was really, you could say, the first verifiable World Economic Forum Young Global Leader style event, because this was an event to choose the leaders, to pick the leaders. And at this international seminar, this CIA funded event, Schwab would be introduced by Kissinger to John Kenneth Galbraith, a man of great I mean, his history is unbelievable. Married to a woman who used to live with Unity Mitford when she was Hitler's girlfriend in Germany. John Kenneth Galbraith studied land policy under Hitler in 1938. Seems to be a bit of a spy in a sense. He was sent back, worked on strategic stuff through the war, and then sent back again to interrogate Albert Speer, who is the Reich Minister for armaments and war. So the biggest person you could possibly interrogate from the Nazi Wehrmacht was who John Kenneth Galbraith was said to, and he was like agricultural land policy guy who taught at Harvard. He was supposed to study under John Maynard Keynes in the 30s, but Maynard Keynes had a heart attack, so he ended up going over to Germany to study and going through all of this stuff, etc. He would be the guy who would teach Joseph P. Kennedy in 1957, and then a couple of years later, earlier than that, 1947, I think it was, and then a couple of years later would teach John F. Kennedy. So he was the teacher of John F. Kennedy at the Warburg, I think it's a Paul L. Warburg School in Harvard. Obviously, these people were really, really influential. John Kenneth Galbraith would go on to advise Kennedy. He would go on to write the speech for Lyndon B. Johnson, the first draft of the speech after Kennedy's assassination. He would go on to coin phrases used all over the place, announce post-Keynesian economics, as well as announcing Keynesian economics as well. He was the person who would go on then in the late 60s to merge and mix with Klaus Schwab. He was another CFR member, wrote for the CFR Journal, Council on Foreign Relations, and he would mix with Henry Kissinger, and he would be introduced to Klaus Schwab through the international seminar there at Harvard, where he was already based there anyway. And he would be pushed forward to be one of the mentors to Schwab to go back to Europe and encourage people eventually to take part in this World Economic Forum and the building of what was the European Management Symposium for the first couple of years, then the European Management Forum for a couple of decades, and then would become the World Economic Forum. But that was Kissinger saying, John Kenneth Galbraith, an economic social policy expert of the highest order, advisor to multiple presidents, really someone who, again, as well, interestingly, fought against the Vietnam War. Oh, there's a Freudian slip. Has fought against the Vietnam War openly, and then joined together for the Mandeville lectures and to work with Kissinger in these international seminars. While Kissinger was pushing for the opposite, while it was being advised that they should get out of Vietnam, they still did the opposite, because there was a lot of that was, I think, psychological operations, and there was a lot of other things going on. Then they were making a hell of a lot of money and doing a lot of tests and being very productive for their military industrial complex during the Vietnam War years. So that's why they encouraged it. It also allowed them as a further dynamic into Asia that would eventually see then of course, China and America meeting under Nixon, while Kissinger was Secretary of State, and Kissinger would go to secret meetings to set that up as well. So obviously there was a tilt going towards Asia, but the main focus was on Europe. When they did the Mandeville lectures, Kissinger and John Kenneth Galbraith together, they were talking. John Kenneth Galbraith's talk was on the cool descent, European cool descent, and Kissinger's was on foreign policy in Europe and the way forward in the future. In 1966, Kissinger had been put in part of head of a 22-man commission. They include people from Standard Oil and loads of other CFR members on the future of Europe, on where Europe was going, where they were going to make it go, because they knew that Europe was the key to world domination, in their opinions. You know, they already had this Anglo-American unity after World War II, and they wanted to keep that momentum going so that they could literally take control of Europe in some way. But to do that, you need to install the leaders eventually. And for that, you need to have a course where you install leaders into place, and you have a unit in Europe that allows for then the progression of how they implemented the World Economic Forum, or how they created the World Economic Forum themselves, and that idea would eventually then leak out to the rest of Europe. And as we've seen now, most of the European leaders are World Economic Forum young global leaders who have been trained from really this original course. At the same time, in 1967, when Klaus Schwab would be leaving this international seminar, Herman Kahn would also be being introduced to him. And Herman Kahn is the most interesting person possibly in history. He's known as being the real Dr. Strangelove, and he says that Stanley Kubrick's a friend of his, and said that he wasn't him. And his wife says something like, if he's over 200 pounds, it's definitely not him, which is a joke because Herman Kahn was extremely fat, of course. And Herman Kahn was a crazy man. Through the 50s, he worked on workshops for the Hudson Institute, funded by the Rand Corporation, really in line with the thermonuclear deterrence threat. They used game theory, which is the analyzing rational agents and how they act towards each other, and how to combat actions that come from to react from their actions. It's a really complicated thing, it sounds, but game theory allows you to simplify very complicated events, map out possible scenarios, and they did that very well in the Hudson Institute under this Herman Kahn, the real-life Dr. Strangelove. And in 1961, he would produce a work called On Thermonuclear War, and 4 years later, Dr. Strangelove would come out. And these events are really important in the history of humanity, because they had just gone through a propaganda scare through the media, scaring the hell out of people. Thermonuclear war's on its way. Duck and cover. We're all going to die. We're all going to die. The Russians are going to attack us. The Russians are going to attack us. You have all of these different things happening. Everybody's scared of this standoff. The world's in fear. They pumped up the energy so much. And then On Thermonuclear War comes out, which shows how deterrence work, and other work he produced a year before that shows how deterrence works, how it's basically a nuclear standoff that no one's going to fire a weapon unless it's by accident or sabotage. So the likelihood is going to be no fire in a nuclear war. But the second point of deterrence is that leaves a load of political paradigm that comes from that. How do we combat those issues? And then the third part is, how do we then combat the things that come from those things to make the other side not profitable for the other side to attack us in any way, or to take other actions that come from the second part of nuclear deterrence. And it became so complicated and so absurd and so impossible to explain. But the main point was, we're all scared, yet no one's going to fire a nuclear bomb. So the world suddenly come to a point where it's like, how do we explain this to people? And then Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove comes out, which shows the absurdity of thermonuclear deterrence and thermonuclear war, described in a sense by Herman Kahn. Exactly. Herman Kahn, like he says, he's a friend of Stanley Kubrick. And you feel that the Dr. Strangelove character, of course, they call him Herman Kahn, the real Dr. Strangelove. And he was crazy. Like there's a time where they ask him what type of view he takes. He's like, big, ethereal, imperial, massive, blah, blah, blah. And he ends by screaming and pointing up, jumping out of his chair and screaming, megalomania, zoom. You know, he was nuts. But Dr. Strangelove seems like a merger between Henry Kissinger, Herman Kahn, and Fritz Kramer, that demonic, and he's crazy nuts. You know, it was a merger between those three characters, I believe personally. And you can see it within the film. And it's a brilliant film, but the film showed the absurdity. You know, American colonel sitting on a base going nuts, locking his second in charge, who's a sensible guy, into a room, causing him to watch the absurdity going on all around as their own members of their own base fire at each other as they slowly work their way towards nuclear war. And then they find out about this doomsday device and that it'll explode the world if a nuclear bomb, but we're all heading towards it anyway, and everything's crazy and it's all absurd. And it allowed suddenly that movie itself and the topics that came from it did the same thing, or did pull the pressure off from the media, intense media that had come before, to propaganda people into being scared, be scared, be scared. And then suddenly it was like, oh, look what you've been scared of is ridiculous. Isn't that funny?
Just to clarify for everybody, in case they may have gotten a little bit lost along the way, so it was between about 1965 and 1967. First, Klaus meets Kissinger. He then gets introduced to John Galbraith. He then gets introduced, lastly, to Herman Kahn, and that's around about 1967, before Klaus returns to Zurich in Switzerland to work at Escher Weiss.
To work at Escher Weiss, where he gets, when he's introduced to these characters, and these characters he knows are going to go on and help him form. Herman Kahn and John Kenneth Galbraith will go to Europe, will convince other people, big people, to come on board, along with another few guys, including people like von Habsburg and stuff, who were all heavily involved in the beginning and creation of the World Economic Forum. They would come across to persuade people to get involved, because not many people believed, you know, Europe was a mess, so trying to get some coherence was hard. And yet they would come along. They would be the guys, the opening team. They would be the opening team, like when you open a hotel. I've been in a few of those. And John Kenneth Galbraith would be the speaker at the World Economic Forum, the first keynote speaker, with a Herman Kahn there drawing attention. And Herman Kahn was extremely, I mean, in these circles, we could be seen as a super celebrity.
Was Kissinger at the very first one in 1971?
No, Kissinger. See, I mean, Kissinger during the period. This period is now in the Nixon administration, and he is flying all over the place, doing all sorts of things. He has got his fingers in all the pies. He is very much the executive director of this project, and the fact that he sets it up, he puts the right people in place to work with Klaus Schwab, and he sends them off to do that job. And in I think it's 1973 when Kissinger becomes Secretary of State. Before that, he's very much a really, very, really close advisor to Nixon, and their policies are concentrating on the next stage. So the year of Europe is going to be under that time, where they're going to focus on Europe. They're going to prop up the EEC, and they're going to say that's necessary, like the European Economic Commission or etc. It's really important that you have all of these entities that are strong and powerful. We need to shore up NATO as well, and they're pushing for all these things. At the same time, they're also trying to bring China in and do all of these other things. So Kissinger, and until probably about 1980, he doesn't go to the World Economic Forum events. He is set up, the guys are set up, and then it's set up to run on its own. It has a little bump on the second. They use a little bit of a Malthusian interest to spark up the 1973 one again in a very sinister way.
Is that the Club of Rome?
Yes, the Club of Rome. Well, what Aurelio Pecci, who heads up and represents a book called Limit of Growth, which people may want to read, but is very depressing and is based on principle by a guy called Thomas Malthus. I would suggest that to understand a lot of the ideology in the world, you want to start with Thomas Malthus and work your way forward. So people should do their own research on that for sure. And it's a very sad state of affairs. But yes, this creation of the World Economic Forum was from this CIA-funded course. And at the same time, the CIA, that Schwab was leaving Harvard, Herman Kahn was also finishing two extremely important pieces of work that are associated with the entirety of Schwab's future. One is, of course, the year 2000, which basically used, again, game theory to analyze the advances in technology over the next 30 years, to discover what advances in technology could be reached in that time. And game theory did a very good job. Basically, it's a moment in history where you can see something that's as close to prophecy as you can ever imagine. The second link up from my most recent article, the second link from the bottom, is a full list of all of these technological advancements that were predicted in 1967's year 2000. And it includes so many things that we just did not know generally would even possibly be a thing. They already predicted it all in 1967. And the list shows you the green ones which have been achieved, purple ones which have almost been achieved, and red ones which they desperately want to achieve. And these tech advances, some of them bigger paradigm shifters than nuclear war and the creation of the atomic bomb. You know, these are really big technologies that can change the entire fate, could wipe us off the planet. And Herman Kahn puts a lot of warnings into this work. You know, year 2000, you've got to be careful. Look at all of these different things. But in a sense, it became like almost like a tick, I should say, like a tick sheet, like for Schwab to tick off, and his technocratic brethren to tick off the advances, ignoring the warnings and just going forward with that process. At the same time, Kahn was also producing a secret document, or a government document, called the ancillary document for the leadership, for special educational needs for leaders, something along those lines it's called. And basically it was I think mapping out the course that had just been. It was explaining the Harvard International Seminar, but really what it said in detail was, oh, look, we've got lots of problems, and they all come from all of this war. And this war comes from the fact that Europeans speak different language, and we need to form a massive superstate, and we need to get everybody given common values and shared values. And for that to happen, we need to train a leadership group early on, separate from society, and give them the common and shared values that then they can give to us, the peasant class. It also states, in detail how to achieve this. You know, it does go into detail about how they're going to train a special leadership group outside of society, and they'll turn universities into a place to recruit and train administrators who will help. So the best you can get for university level is be an administrator to help at the. I'm the peasant class. I will help you. I will help you achieve your evil aims. That's the best you can aim for. That's what they wanted to create. It also has some really concerning ideas about where they talk about what they term the Negro population, and how it's expanding too quickly, and how this isn't good at all. And some of the language they use in it makes you feel sick. And so 1967, they've got this little document coming out saying we need to train all of the leaders in society separate from everybody else and in secret, and implant them with common shared values so they can implant that on the rest of the world. And we need to create this massive super state that overpowers, so we can overpower Europe. And then we've taken over the world, and we've got world peace. And that's what we need to do. And we need to make sure the population is the right color and the right shape through our policies. That was what 1967 said, and Klaus Schwab was, I mean, he must have been inspired. 1967, he goes back, he gets a phone call from Peter Schmidheiny, who was the son of Colonel Jacob Schmidheiny, who was the guy who had run Escher Weiss Ravensburg factory, or Escher Weiss in general, while Eugene Schwab, Klaus Schwab's father, was managing the model Nazi company. And his son, Peter Schmidheiny, was now managing Escher Weiss, and they were planning a merger. And he said, you know about modern management methods now. You've been to Harvard. Come help us with the merger of Escher Weiss and Sulzer AG, and I believe Brown Bavaria as well, and another couple of little companies that they don't really mention because they were too small to mention. And the idea was to merge these companies so that each of these companies would have their own separate field that they would be focused on. They would share research and etc. And they would all be able to make money much better. Sounds like a nice idea, depending on what you make money on. Eventually, it would be changed to Sulzer Escher Weiss and then Sulzer AG shortly afterwards, as Klaus Schwab took over the merger as second in control of the company. And through that merger and beyond, they would also, just like Klaus Schwab's father did, be helping a fascist regime to create a weapon of mass destruction by aiding the South African regime in its failed nuclear bomb attempt. Parts of the necessary
just
parts.
to clarify for everybody, just in case we're getting lost again, is that it's now 1967, and Klaus has met these three men in the last 3 years, and now he's taking a pause from Harvard and the USA, and he's going to Zurich, Switzerland, to Escher Weiss, and he's going to start working for them in the merger with Sulzer, which helps with heavy water stuff in relation to the South African apartheid.
At the start, heavy water stuff, but then chips for bombs. I mean, within my first article, Schwab Family Values, there's one of the sources, if you look at it, is one of the chips that for a bomb that Escher Weiss is under Escher Weiss's name, is patented under Escher Weiss at that time. I mean, it later in the 70s, and up to the 90s, where a book and a report was written about it, the Swiss would discover this, that Escher Weiss, who was officially a Swiss company, even though it had the Ravensburg branch and helped the Nazis, and it was detached in that way during the Second World War, it was discovered, and they did a whole review into why it happened, and it was exposed completely. Sulzer AG, during that time, were helping the apartheid racist South African regime to illegally acquire a nuclear weapon.
And this is all whilst Klaus was there doing the merger.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, he's not only on his watch, but he's creating these companies in his image, and his image is obviously molded by his father, who was doing exactly the same thing. And it's so bizarre. When I started researching this, I was expecting, as soon as I found out his father was a guy called Eugene Schwab, I was expecting, and he was a manager of a factory, I was expecting it to be a very boring factory and him to do very boring things. I did not expect to find out or about any of the atomic bomb stuff. Then when I went on, I expected, okay, Klaus Schwab's not going to do that stuff though, is he? And he just does the same thing. And it's honestly, it is amazing when you write just the evidence down. And like I said at the beginning of this, you write all the evidence down, you look at what it means, and it forms the story itself. And the real life story of Klaus Schwab and his family history, how it led to that point, is quite amazing. It's quite amazing. So he's left straight out of Harvard, straight from these big guys who are going to help him set up this dystopian enterprise that would eventually almost take over the world. I think, I mean, it seems crazy to say that, but when you see the amount of World Economic Forum young global leaders who have been installed into power, you have to, and the fact that they're all following a globalist agenda and have been since at least 1997, you have to be really open. You have to open your eyes, and you have to accept, okay, these guys have got reach, these guys have got influence. These guys have been behind the scenes. These guys have covered up the true history and the true nature of their leader, the eternal head of the WEF, the guy who, he's not democratically elected people. No, he keeps control of that because it's an important intelligence operation that's been going since the 1960s, and you can't have anybody else who isn't trusted involved or in charge of that affair. They've slowly, if you look at the people who they've surrounded themselves with over the years, you have the right-hand man of Klaus Schwab is Richard Edelman of Edelman PR. His father was Daniel J. Edelman. He was psychological operations during World War II. You've got a lot of people like that who are from this World War II era, where they discovered how to get things done by committing psychological atrocities against humankind.
Well, thanks for chatting with Open Voice today. And I
It
look
was
forward
fun.
to
Thank you.
chatting to you again.
Yeah. This is listen. I love chatting away. I love talking about this stuff, but I also love just trying to encourage people to go out and look for themselves. It's what my article's about as well. Really delve into them. These little links, when you see a word and it's got a little underline, you can click on that and it'll open up the source. And you know what it'll do? It'll confirm to you that what I've said in that sentence exists in reality somewhere else. And a lot of the time I've had to go really far to find those sources. I've had to find them from things that have been deleted online because they don't want you to see this stuff. So let's go on an exploration together. Let's go on a journey together, and let's make it all drinking out of a cup of truth, because I can promise you that it'll be as good as the cup of tea I'm about to have now.
Sounds good.